Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 228, and I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man, and this footage is from Under Construction episode 16, and if you want to check it out in real time, go watch that video, and I'm talking about tons of stuff, and special little alteration to how we do stuff on Under Construction, or not how we do stuff, but I suppose how we do stuff. I'm not going to spoil it. Anyways, we have a question today that we're going to go over. It was written by our very own Eastrail11. He's very good at posting questions. And it was on Zombie Train 202. Zombie Train Maintenance. There we go. Let's mute that real quick. Scroll down to the comment. And there we go. Eastrail11, 6 months ago. When you transitioned to diesels, did you prefer a single type of locomotive of does you take whatever? Oh, or did you take whatever, I would suppose. Same goes with any specific railroad scheme. Did steam go extinct again, or was it still used? Okay, so, yeah, we ran into a diesel transition period. Now, it's funny, because it was a very short-lived sort of, well, I guess we're getting back in the steam game again. We just, restored several hundred steam locomotives or so, and now we're building more, and steam is going to last forever. We're pulling coal out of the ground at a crazy rate, and blah, 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 blah. And then, suddenly, it was, okay, we're going to go across the Atlantic and get in touch with some guys who have what we need in terms of oil refinery. Basically we just needed knowledge and we needed some specific parts that we couldn't make ourselves. Most refineries had burned or been abandoned and subjected to all sorts of I hesitate to call them infestations. That's not really the right word, but vandals, I guess, is the right word. I just didn't have it in me. So we didn't have much in the way of refining capability. In fact, we had none. And as for oil, pulling it out of the ground and transporting it, that was an issue as well. Transporting it, not as much, but either way, most of the super easily tapped oil deposits in the U.S. had sort of been tapped out by that point in time. So, it was sort of a tall order when we figured, well, we should really start moving towards a petroleum-based economy again. Being all steampunk is nice, but it's, it costs a lot, takes a lot of work, and of course steam engines are and always have been and always will be hell for maintenance, compared to a diesel especially. So, we determined that it was in our best interest to start producing diesel as quickly as possible, and this is where things came a lot more easily and a lot quicker than steam ever did. With steam you had maybe, optimistically 50 engines around the country that can run. Maybe that's not that optimistic in terms of just what a number is, but, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. In terms of good-sized engines, you're probably looking at a dozen, that you could actually pull out and run. But I digress. We had diesels lying all over the place, and I mean all over the place. In every major rail yard, on every major main line for the most part, you'd see things sitting on the sidelines that either we had to push out of the way, or that just happened to be there, idling and eventually ran out of fuel, or just sitting there. And the ones that didn't run out of fuel were godsends when we needed them. The ones that did run out of fuel were gigantic, painful roadblocks, because sitting there and waiting for a steam locomotive to, unload its brake pipe into or unload its brake air reservoir into a mile-long freight train that we then have to slowly push out of the way. That wasn't fun. It never was fun. And sometimes it got a little bit hairy, and sometimes it just wouldn't happen. And then we would have to find an alternate route. That only happened a couple of times because generally we would make a note of where that was and come back there with some help, which we did have from time to time. But, slowly we accumulated this record of where all of these locomotives are that we can use. And, it's not like you had to look very hard. The things we sprung for, of course, when we started working with diesels again, first of all, it was the most fuel-efficient stuff we could find. So that means, the late Tier 3s, because we never really got to Tier 4. Stuff that had been redone for the sake of emissions, for the sake of fuel economy, especially fuel economy. And then, following that up, the older stuff. And by older, I mean significantly older, like stuff you can work on fairly easily without huge facilities and stuff like that. Stuff that you can manufacture parts for fairly easily, like, old Jeeps, primarily. And just because of, just for parts-wise and stuff like that, aside from the very, very new stuff, our fleet consisted mostly of Jeeps and SDs, until we really got in the swing of it and started bringing all sorts of stuff back online. It was just a sort of preferential thing based on the ease of fabrication and keeping them running, and sort of an abundancy thing. There's a lot of Jeeps around. You don't even start to realize how, there's like one around every corner or whatever. But there you go, there definitely are. And so we ended up with this assortment of mostly Jeeps that were coming in to supplement and then slowly replace the steam locomotives. Now, the steam locomotives, as it were, served a lot of niche purposes, and over the couple of years that we'd been using them the way they were, it was more than a couple of years, but over the time span, they sort of fell into certain roles. Engines would be in certain locations, doing certain things. Different kinds of engines were good for some things, whatever, what have you. And so in some cases, engines started getting ousted from roles fairly quickly. That includes jobs like yard switching and shuttle service, because diesels were good to just, start up and go, especially the shuttle service stuff. We didn't have to spend man-hours and fuel keeping an engine banked all the time. Not that it's that much fuel, but, somebody's got to keep an eye on it. And so that made things a lot easier. The long-distance heavy stuff was afforded by steam engines for a while, and sort of the smaller engines got shoved into more and more backwoods positions and eventually taken out of service. We never had a really centralized location for storing all these engines, but for the most part we tried to bring them to places where they wouldn't end up rotting, like some of the ones that we'd found. Old museums, old roundhouses. We even built a few... We did build a few of these, like, makeshift steam warehouses where we would store these engines in, just in case, because our fuel supply line, especially early on, was very shaky. And the moment we had a fuel supply line, the Navy sort of leaned on us and went, "Hey, all that fuel you got, what would be really useful?" And so at that point it was like, yeah, sure, just have some of this. We're working fine with coal-fired things. Ugh. I only make that noise because it's like, I can't believe they just sort of talked us into that. And it's not like we didn't have ground to stand on, and I could have fought them if I wanted to. Like, I know this is our gains, but it's not worth for me going toe-to-toe with them, strong-arming them on anything, because of the amount of manpower and the amount of freedom they provide us in conducting our operations, and always did during the course of the Zombie Train Incorporated. Not to mention they gave us a Zeppelin, but, that was just a, well, it was a bribe. But, yeah, so, brought in the super recent stuff, and then the old stuff, and then all the Jeeps, and then everything else. And that sort of, it came in waves a little bit, but it really was sporadic, because it was, oh, let's see, we have some here, let's start these up, let's see if they work. You know, you'd have some engines that are sitting on the sidelines for a long period of time, and you go to start them up, and there's some massive failure, and one of these won't work, and the other one, you know, for this reason, the other one won't work for this reason, but we can salvage parts from these two to get this third one running, and so, you know, that was a fairly common occurrence right when the diesel age started. It's something that we weren't, that we didn't have the freedom or ability to do, I suppose. Not the freedom to do. We just straight up didn't have the ability to do it when we started our steam era, because you're dealing with railroads, or you're dealing with engines from all different railroads with no semblance of standardized parts. You know, and we were at such a motive power crunch that it was not worth saying, okay, well, put that one aside and work on this one. It's work on both of them as soon as possible. Whereas with the diesels, we were worried about power a little bit, but it was so much less so than when we started with the steam engines, because we already had steam engines. And so it wasn't a rush to, oh, let's get the diesels online super quick, we need them right now. It was the, okay, well, when we get you some fuel, see if those diesels work, and if they do, try to supplement your steam power with them. And, it was a very sort of almost touch and go sort of thing, because it wasn't structured at all. And at this point, the sort of command structure wasn't very centralized anymore. It had spread out. We got some reports back from places, but, we kept tabs, but we didn't give direct orders to every yard and every field station anymore. That was, we had too many people. It was so far beyond us. And because of that, the steam to diesel transition is not actually the most well-recorded thing in the world for the Zombie Train Incorporated. But at the end of the day, it was, it was something that had to happen and did happen within, the period of a handful of years. It wasn't, it's not like untested technology versus proven technology. It did not stand up at all to what the transition era was on the real-life railroads. It was just a moment of, well, now we have the ability to do this, let's start doing that. And, it helped, mostly because of the maintenance, like I said, and because of the transportation of fuel. Obviously, transporting diesel fuel can be a little bit more riskier, a little bit more volatile than coal, but, it's diesel, it's not that much more. And the coal can be put to other uses, and it was, mostly for creating power, until we got some, other stuff online. Mostly hydro. Well, we were on hydro for a long time. Getting the coal plants up was a big leap. And then, we sort of pushed for energy that we didn't have to continually funnel stuff into. Nuclear was good. Nuclear was a good try. There are a lot of nuclear plants around, and I will talk about some of those in an upcoming episode. But the ease at which you can throw together something like a wind turbine is ridiculous. And so then you had all these little settlements with little outcroppings of wind turbines outside. Of course, solar panels are a pain to make, so it's not like we went to run for full solar. But the little communities that either didn't have a grid or their grid was disconnected, generally jumped to wind power, or basically built a makeshift power plant and had us bring in coal. So, they kept getting coal. We started using diesel for our engines. We slowly transitioned over. Although, as of saying this, and this is a ways down the line, it's not like diesel's fully taken hold. It's actually kind of strange. You see, the bigger engines, the biggest engines, especially the big boys and the Challenger, since they've come back into service, and people see just how useful that power is, especially with the, the sort of parts that are easier to replace than a diesel's parts, when you have to make them from scratch. They've really seen some usefulness, and they still continue to see some usefulness. We went through a lot to get the steam engines running, and then we ended up with a whole bunch of very usable steam engines. And the places where it's easier to get coal than diesel, well, that's just what they're going to run. So, like I said, I don't keep tabs on everything these days, but yeah, the diesel transition was quite an interesting period in Zombie Train Incorporated history.